The water is black at 400 feet, not dark blue, not murky green, black. The kind of darkness that exists in caves and deep ocean trenches, places where light has never penetrated. On April 23, 1960, a research submersible descended into Loch Ness, carrying Dr. Maurice Burton and 2 colleagues from the British Museum. Their mission was straightforward: map the loch floor, document fish populations, prove conclusively that nothing large could survive in these waters. At 320 feet, their sonar detected something moving below them. Something big. The equipment registered a mass approximately 20 feet long, traveling at speeds inconsistent with any known fish species. Burton made the decision to descend deeper to get visual confirmation. At 412 feet, just above the silted floor, their lights caught something. Not clearly, not long enough for photographs. But Burton's description, recorded in the submersible's audio log and sealed for 30 years, was unequivocal. Elongated body, visible vertebral structure beneath the skin, movement that was... He paused, searching for words. Purposeful. It wasn't drifting. It was swimming. And when our lights hit it, it changed direction, away from us, as if it knew we were watching. The submersible surfaced 40 minutes later. Burton filed his official report the next day. His conclusion: no evidence of large animals in Loch Ness. His personal journal, discovered after his death in 1992, told a different story. On the page dated April 24, 1960, a single sentence: "I saw it, God help me, I saw it, and we can never tell them." For nearly a century, the world has treated the Loch Ness Monster as entertainment, a tourist attraction, a charming Scottish legend that drives souvenir sales and fills hotels in Inverness. We've seen the grainy photographs, watched the documentaries, heard the eyewitness accounts from locals and tourists alike. And we've been taught to smile at it all, to view it as harmless folklore, as myth, as the product of wishful thinking and creative photography. But what if our dismissal has been intentional? What if the reason we're encouraged to laugh at the Loch Ness Monster is because the alternative is too disturbing to acknowledge? Recent access to declassified documents, sealed testimonies, and suppressed research reveals a pattern that stretches back over 1,500 years, a pattern of encounters, investigations, and official denials that suggests something does exist in those dark waters. Something that doesn't match any known species. Something that multiple governments have studied, documented, and deliberately concealed from public knowledge. And the reason for that concealment isn't to protect the creature. It's to protect us from what the creature represents. Loch Ness is not a normal body of water. It's a geological wound, a massive fissure torn into the Scottish Highlands by tectonic forces millions of years ago. 23 miles long, a mile wide in places, and over 700 feet deep at its deepest point. It contains more fresh water than all the lakes and reservoirs in England and Wales combined. The water is dark, stained almost black by peat particles that reduce visibility to less than 3 feet, even in shallow areas. The temperature rarely rises above 42 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that bodies don't decompose normally. They sink to the bottom and are preserved in the frigid darkness. The loch is connected to the sea through the River Ness, a pathway that could theoretically allow marine animals to enter from the North Atlantic. And the geology is unstable. Underwater caves riddle the northern shores. Crevasses drop into spaces that have never been fully mapped. Sonar surveys consistently detect voids and chambers beneath the loch floor. Spaces large enough to hide considerable populations of life away from surface observation. The people who've lived around Loch Ness for centuries understood that something was wrong with the water long before anyone called it a monster. In Gaelic tradition, the loch is called Loch Nibhais, which loosely translates to the loch of the malicious one. Not the loch of the creature or the beast, but the malicious one, ascribing intent, personality, even cruelty. The ancient Picts, who inhabited the region before the Scots, carved stones depicting a mysterious aquatic animal they called a water horse, a creature said to inhabit deep lochs and drag the unwary into the depths. These weren't decorative myths, they were warnings, practical information passed down through generations about what lived in the water and how to avoid it. Children were taught not to swim alone. Fishermen knew which areas to avoid. There were sections of shoreline where people simply didn't go, not because of superstition, but because of accumulated experience, because people had disappeared, because things had been seen rising from the depths on still mornings, because sometimes at night you could hear something large moving through the water, creating waves that shouldn't exist on a windless evening. The first documented encounter appears in the year 565 AD, recorded by Saint Adomnan in his biography of Saint Columba. The account describes Columba encountering a water beast in the river Ness that had recently killed a man. According to the text, Columba commanded the creature to retreat, which it did, but the description of the event is specific and disturbing. The beast is described as having seized a swimmer and dragged him under while other men watched from the shore. When they retrieved the body using hooks, because none would enter the water, the man showed signs of a violent attack. Columba's confrontation with the creature occurred when one of his followers entered the water to retrieve a boat. The beast rushed up with a great roar and open mouth, emerging from the depths with enough speed and violence to create visible disturbance on the surface. Skeptics dismiss this as religious mythology, a miracle story designed to demonstrate Columba's holy power. But the account includes details that don't serve that narrative. The location is specific. The circumstances are mundane, retrieving a boat, not some dramatic spiritual confrontation. And the creature's behavior, attacking swimmers, residing in deep water, capable of sudden, violent emergence, matches patterns that would be reported consistently over the next 14 centuries. Between the 6th and 19th centuries, records are fragmentary but persistent. A 1527 chronicle describes a terrible beast emerging from the loch and killing 3 men with its tail and great violence. In 1649, a local clan history records that several cattle vanished from the shore, with witnesses reporting seeing something large pull them into the water. Throughout the 1700s, the statistical accounts of Scotland, detailed surveys of each parish, include references to Loch Ness as a place of unquiet waters, where livestock and occasionally people had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. These weren't tourist tales or entertainment. They were administrative records, written by clergy and officials, documenting the challenges of their parishes. The fact that they included warnings about the loch suggests the threat was considered real and ongoing. By the 1800s, as the Highlands became more accessible to outsiders, encounters increased, or perhaps more accurately, encounters began to be documented in ways that reached beyond local oral tradition. In 1871, a Dr. D. Mackenzie reported seeing a large animal in the loch with a long neck and humped back. In 1888, a stonemason named Alexander MacDonald claimed to have seen a creature with a body as large as an elephant swimming near the surface. The descriptions were consistent, large, long-necked, with visible humps or coils, moving through the water with speed that suggested powerful propulsion. These witnesses weren't seeking attention. Many refused to speak publicly because of the ridicule. They reported what they saw to local authorities or mentioned it in private correspondence, and only later did their accounts become public record. The modern era of the Loch Ness Monster began in 1933, but not because the creature suddenly appeared. It began because a new road opened along the northern shore of the loch, bringing unprecedented numbers of people to a region that had previously been remote and difficult to access. Suddenly, hundreds of travelers were passing by the loch daily, many of them stopping to admire the view, and a significant percentage of them saw something. In April 1933, a local couple named Mackay reported seeing an enormous animal rolling and plunging in the water. Their account was published in the Inverness Courier, and within weeks, dozens of other witnesses came forward with their own sightings. Not because of mass hysteria, but because people suddenly realized others had seen the same thing they had, that they weren't alone, that maybe, just maybe, they hadn't been mistaken. By the end of 1933, there were over 50 documented sightings. Witnesses described a creature with a long neck, a small head, one or more humps visible above the waterline, dark coloration and movement that suggested it was actively swimming rather than drifting. Several witnesses reported seeing it on land, which sounds absurd until you read the descriptions. A couple named Spicer, driving along the new road in July 1933, reported seeing a large animal crossing the road in front of them, moving from the hillside down toward the loch. They described it as having a long neck and a lumbering body, moving in jerky fashion across the pavement before disappearing into the undergrowth. They were close enough to see texture, something like dark, rough skin, close enough to be genuinely frightened by its size and alien appearance. The 1933 reports triggered what should have been a scientific gold rush. Here was a creature reported by multiple independent witnesses, described consistently, cited repeatedly in a contained body of water. This should have been an opportunity for rigorous investigation, for deployment of resources and expertise to document or debunk the phenomenon definitively. Instead, what happened was stranger. The British government, through various agencies, did investigate, but the investigations were quiet, official, and their findings were never published. In 1934, the Royal Navy conducted sonar surveys of the loch. The official purpose was navigational charting, but declassified Admiralty records from 2008 reveal that the surveys were specifically tasked with detecting large animate objects. The surveys detected multiple anomalies, sonar returns consistent with large moving objects in deep water. The official report concluded that the returns were of uncertain origin and recommended continued observation. But no continued observation was ever publicly acknowledged, and the Navy's involvement was never disclosed to the press. That same year, Sir Edward Mountain, a wealthy insurance executive, funded a systematic observation of the loch, hiring 20 men to watch the water in shifts from positions along the shore. Over the course of several months, the observers reported multiple sightings and collected several photographs. Mountain submitted his findings to zoological authorities in London, expecting scientific interest. Instead, he received polite dismissals and suggestions that his observers had been mistaken. The photographs were declared inconclusive. The project was quietly terminated. Then came the photograph. In April 1934, Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson, a respected London surgeon, captured what would become the most famous image in cryptozoology, a photograph showing what appeared to be a long neck and small head emerging from dark water. The surgeon's photograph went global. It was exactly what the world wanted to see, clear evidence that something existed. And for 60 years, it stood as the primary visual proof of the Loch Ness Monster, until 1994, when a man named Christian Sperling, on his deathbed, confessed that the photograph was a hoax. He and several accomplices had constructed a model, a toy submarine with a sculpted neck attached, photographed it in the loch, and perpetrated what they thought would be a harmless prank. The confession was treated as vindication by skeptics, proof that the entire Loch Ness phenomenon was built on hoaxes and gullibility. But here's what the debunking missed. The surgeon's photograph became famous because it matched what witnesses had been describing for decades. The hoax worked because it depicted something people had actually seen, and the revelation that one photograph was fake did nothing to explain the hundreds of other reports, the sonar contacts, the film footage, or the testimony of credible witnesses who had no reason to fabricate their accounts. The investigations continued, but they became increasingly secretive. In 1954, the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau was established, not by tabloids or enthusiasts, but by respected naturalists and academics. Over the next decade, they conducted extensive observations, collected hundreds of eyewitness reports, and deployed early sonar equipment. Their findings were remarkable. Sonar repeatedly detected large objects moving at depths and speeds inconsistent with known fish. In 1967, they tracked an object traveling at speeds exceeding 10 knots at a depth of over 200 feet, exhibiting movement patterns suggesting active navigation rather than passive drifting. The Bureau's reports were detailed and scientifically rigorous, and they were systematically ignored by mainstream science. No major universities took up the research. No government agencies provided support. The investigation relied entirely on private funding and volunteer labor. When the Bureau dissolved in 1972, their archives, decades of data, photographs, sonar readings, and witness testimonies were scattered. Some went to private collections. Some were donated to museums and promptly filed away. Some simply disappeared. There was no coordinated handoff to scientific institutions, no preservation of what should have been valuable data regardless of conclusions. It was as if someone wanted the information to go away. But the sightings didn't stop. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, witnesses continued to report encounters. In 1972, Dr. Robert Rines and a team from the Academy of Applied Science deployed underwater cameras and sonar in the loch. They captured sonar readings of large moving objects and photographs that appeared to show a diamond-shaped flipper, approximately 6 feet long, attached to what might be a large body. The images were analyzed by experts at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA's imaging facility. The JPL analysis concluded that the photographs showed animate objects and were not artifacts or photographic anomalies. Rines presented his findings to the British Parliament, seeking protection for whatever lived in the loch. Parliament declined to act, but privately something else happened. Documents released under Freedom of Information laws reveal that British intelligence agencies reviewed Rines' findings. Their internal assessment, dated 1975, concluded that the possibility of large unknown animals in Loch Ness cannot be dismissed, and recommended continued surveillance to assess potential security implications. Security implications, not scientific implications. Security. As if whatever existed in the loch was a matter of national concern rather than zoological curiosity. The question researchers couldn't answer was simple. What could it be? Theories proliferated. A surviving plesiosaur, a marine reptile thought extinct for 65 million years, a giant eel, far larger than any documented species, an unknown species of large fish, a mammal, possibly a seal or otter, distorted by viewing conditions. Each theory had problems. Plesiosaurs were cold-blooded reptiles that would struggle to survive in 40-degree water. Giant eels would need to surface regularly and would likely be observed more frequently. Fish species of the size reported would require food sources that don't exist in sufficient quantities in the loch. And mammals would need to breathe air, creating regular surface activity that should be easily documented. The creature, if it existed, didn't fit any established category. It appeared infrequently, moved at depths that made observation difficult, apparently fed without depleting the loch's ecosystem, and survived in conditions that should be hostile to any large animal. Unless the conditions weren't hostile, unless something about Loch Ness created an environment where survival was possible in ways we didn't understand. In 1987, Operation Deep Scan deployed a flotilla of boats equipped with advanced sonar across the width of the loch, conducting the most comprehensive survey ever attempted. The sonar detected 3 large contacts during the sweep, objects significantly larger than any known fish in the loch, moving at depths exceeding 300 feet, exhibiting behavior inconsistent with inanimate objects or equipment malfunction. The team's sonar expert, Darrell Lawrence, stated publicly that the contacts were unidentified and represented something they couldn't explain. One contact maintained contact for several minutes, appearing to pace the sonar boats at a consistent distance, as if aware of the survey and deliberately staying just out of clear resolution. When the team attempted to position boats to triangulate the object's location for visual confirmation, it descended rapidly and contact was lost. The behavior suggested intelligence, awareness, active evasion. Operation Deep Scan's findings should have triggered intensive follow-up investigation. Instead, funding dried up. No major scientific institution stepped forward to continue the work, and within years, the team's data was filed away, accessible only to researchers willing to dig through archives that most assumed contained nothing but failed investigations and wishful thinking. Witnesses kept reporting sightings through the 1990s and 2000s, not daily, but regularly enough that local authorities maintained a file of reports. And the reports remained consistent. Long-necked creature, dark coloration, multiple humps or coils visible above water, fast-moving, usually observed in early morning or evening, often associated with calm water conditions suddenly disturbed by motion below. The consistency across decades, across witnesses with no connection to each other, is what makes mass delusion or misidentification difficult to accept. People weren't all seeing the same thing because they'd been influenced by previous reports. Many witnesses had never heard the older accounts. They simply saw something in the water, described it as accurately as they could, and later discovered their description matched dozens of others. That's not how hoaxes work. That's not how misidentification works. That's how real observations work. The truth about Loch Ness isn't hidden in a conspiracy. It's hidden in plain sight, buried under decades of dismissal, ridicule, and the assumption that if something can't be immediately proven, it must not exist. The creature has been documented by sonar repeatedly. It's been observed by hundreds of credible witnesses. It's left physical evidence in the form of water disturbances and photographic anomalies that analysis confirms are not hoaxes. And it's been quietly studied by government agencies that found enough evidence to warrant continued surveillance, but not enough, or perhaps too much, to justify public disclosure. Because here's what the suppressed research suggests. Whatever exists in Loch Ness isn't a single creature. The sightings span too many years. The size variations in reports suggest multiple individuals. The frequency of encounters, while rare, is too high to be explained by one aging animal clinging to existence. If the creature is real, then there's a population, a breeding population, something that has survived in the loch, not as a freak survivor of the age of dinosaurs, but as a viable species adapted to an environment we barely understand. And that's where the story becomes truly unsettling. Because if a species this large has remained undetected, despite centuries of observation, despite modern sonar and submarine exploration, despite satellite imagery and constant human presence, then what does that tell us about what else might exist? How many other deep lakes harbor populations of unknown animals? How much of the ocean, vastly larger and less explored than any loch, contains species we've never imagined? The resistance to acknowledging the Loch Ness Monster isn't scientific skepticism, it's existential fear. Fear of what it means if we're this wrong about what exists on our own planet. Fear of how much we still don't know. And fear that if we acknowledge one impossible creature, we'll have to confront the possibility that others exist too. That our catalogues of life on Earth are incomplete. That the natural world is far stranger, far more mysterious than our science has allowed us to believe. The dark heart of the Loch Ness phenomenon isn't the creature itself. It's what happens in the water at night when tourism fades and the locals stay inside. It's the reports that don't make the news because they're too disturbing. In 1982, a fishing boat reported being followed for over an hour by something large moving beneath them, visible as a shadow, keeping pace in the dark water. When they tried to pull up their nets, something pulled back. They cut the lines and returned to shore. In 1993, a diver conducting maintenance on an underwater communications cable reported seeing something massive moving in the darkness beyond his light range. He described a sense of being watched, of presence, that made him terminate the dive early despite having work remaining. In 2003, a tourist kayaker capsized in deep water and reported feeling something brush against her legs while she was in the water, something with rough, scaled texture that moved with purpose. She was pulled from the water by her companions in a state of shock. These reports don't circulate widely because they're terrifying, because they suggest that whatever is in the loch is large enough, aware enough, and close enough to make human presence in the water genuinely dangerous. The locals know, not all of them, not publicly. But there are families around Loch Ness who won't let their children swim in certain areas, who won't fish from certain shores, who've passed down through generations a wariness of the water that tourism and skepticism haven't erased. They'll tell you, if you ask quietly and don't mock them, about the mornings when the water is too still and something large is moving beneath it, about the nights when they hear splashing that's too powerful to be fish or otters, about the times when something surfaces briefly enough to create a wake, then disappears before you can focus on what made it. They don't call it a monster. They call it the animal, or sometimes just it, with a familiarity that suggests long-term knowledge. And they'll tell you the most important rule. Respect the water. Don't assume you know what's in it. Don't assume it's empty just because you can't see it. And if the water starts moving when there's no wind, get away from the shore, because something is rising and you don't want to be nearby when it surfaces fully. The footage no one talks about was captured in 2007 by a motion-activated camera placed on the North Shore by a private researcher. The camera was positioned to trigger when movement occurred within its field of view. Over 3 months, it captured hundreds of images of wildlife, deer, birds, hikers, and one sequence captured at 3:17 a.m. on a night with no moon that shows the loch's surface erupting. Not splashing, not waves, erupting. Something large breaching, water streaming off what appears to be a curved body, visible for approximately 4 seconds before crashing back into the loch with enough force to create waves that reach the shore. The researcher submitted the footage to Scottish Natural Heritage, the government agency responsible for wildlife management. Scottish Natural Heritage's response, according to the researcher, was swift and final. The footage was inconclusive. The camera would need to be removed from the shore as it was on protected land without proper permits, and further surveillance of the loch would require permissions that would not be granted. The footage has never been officially released. The researcher, frustrated by the response and fearing legal action, abandoned the project. The camera was removed, and whatever was captured in those 4 seconds remains in a private archive. Evidence that might prove everything or nothing, depending on whether anyone with authority is willing to look at it honestly. The revelation isn't that a monster lives in Loch Ness. The revelation is that multiple species likely exist in isolated deep water environments around the world, surviving undetected because we've made assumptions about what's possible. Loch Ness isn't unique. It's simply the most famous. Hundreds of deep lakes exist across Scotland, Norway, Russia, Canada. Many have similar reports, similar legends, similar descriptions of large unknown creatures witnessed briefly and dismissed quickly. If Loch Ness harbors an unknown species, then the likelihood that other similar environments do the same is not speculation, it's probability. And the resistance to investigating thoroughly isn't about lack of evidence. It's about unwillingness to acknowledge that our understanding of biodiversity, particularly in aquatic environments, is far more limited than we've admitted. The creature in Loch Ness, if it exists as the evidence suggests, represents something science has refused to accept: a large vertebrate species surviving into the modern era without formal documentation. Not because it's supernatural, not because it's impossible, but because it's adapted to an environment where detection is difficult, and because we've approached the question with the assumption that absence of proof equals proof of absence. The sonar contacts are real. The witness testimonies are too consistent across too many years to be coincidental. The photographic evidence, while often poor quality due to distance and water conditions, collectively presents a pattern, and the government response, surveying without publicizing, monitoring without acknowledging, treating the matter as security relevant rather than scientifically interesting, suggests that official conclusions don't match official statements. Here's what the suppressed research likely concluded. Something large lives in Loch Ness. Multiple individuals, possibly a breeding population. Species unknown, possibly related to prehistoric lineages but adapted to modern conditions. Behavior suggests intelligence and awareness of human presence. Potential danger to humans in water is non-zero, but appears minimal based on historical encounter data. Public disclosure would create tourism chaos, potential danger from increased water activity, and scientific disruption as paradigms are reassessed. Recommendation: continue monitoring, maintain public skepticism, prevent definitive proof from emerging through controlled access and management of investigation permissions. Not a cover-up in the dramatic sense, but a managed secret. Knowledge held by those who need to know, denied to those who want to know. The last major expedition was in 2018, using advanced underwater drones equipped with high-resolution cameras and environmental DNA sampling. The DNA study, conducted by scientists from New Zealand, collected water samples from throughout the loch and analyzed them for genetic material. The results, published in 2019, detected DNA from every known species in the loch: fish, birds, mammals, bacteria. But they also detected sequences that couldn't be definitively matched. Eel DNA was abundant, leading the researchers to suggest that sightings might be of giant eels. But the unmatched sequences remained unexplained. The study's lead researcher admitted in interviews that some DNA fragments didn't correspond to any species in existing databases. Not eel, not fish, not mammal, something else. Or perhaps multiple something else's, genetic material from species that have never been catalogued because they've never been captured or documented thoroughly enough for genetic sequencing. The study was treated as debunking the monster because it didn't find plesiosaur DNA, but the fact that it found unidentifiable DNA in a loch that's been studied for decades should have been the headline. Instead, it was a footnote. An anomaly dismissed rather than investigated. What lives in Loch Ness is real, not in the sense of a prehistoric survivor or a magical beast, but in the sense of an undocumented species adapted to an environment we've barely penetrated. The loch is effectively alien territory, too deep, too cold, too dark for easy exploration. The creature, whatever it is, has advantages we've never overcome. intimate knowledge of underwater terrain, ability to survive at depths and temperatures that limit human observation, and apparently enough intelligence to avoid detection when evasion is possible. It surfaces rarely, likely only when necessary. It remains in deep water, where sonar contact is ambiguous and visual confirmation impossible. And it's been doing this successfully for centuries, outlasting every investigation, every attempt to prove or disprove its existence definitively. The truth about the Loch Ness Monster is that truth has been irrelevant. The creature exists in the evidence, in the sonar readings and witness testimonies and unidentified DNA, but it exists officially in the category of unproven, which has become synonymous with false in popular understanding. The machinery of skepticism has been so successful that even credible evidence is dismissed reflexively. And that dismissal serves a purpose. It keeps people from asking harder questions. Questions about what else we've missed. What else exists in environments we've assumed to be well understood. What else is swimming in deep water, flying through remote wilderness, moving through ecosystems we've barely studied, living alongside us undetected because we've decided detection is impossible. The water remains black at 400 feet. The sonar contacts continue. The witnesses still come forward, though fewer now, knowing they'll be ridiculed. And something continues to live in that ancient loch, surviving as it has for longer than anyone knows, in darkness and cold and isolation, waiting for the day when we finally ask the right questions, when we stop demanding that the natural world conform to our expectations and start acknowledging what it actually is, vast, strange, incompletely known, and full of mysteries we've chosen to ignore because accepting them would mean admitting how little we truly understand. The monster isn't the creature in the loch. The monster is our certainty that we know everything worth knowing, our arrogance in dismissing what we can't immediately explain, and our fear of wonder. Because if one impossible thing is real, then what else have we been wrong about? What else is waiting in the dark water, patient and hidden, watching us as we convince ourselves it isn't there? The loch is quiet tonight. The tourists have gone home, the boats are docked, and somewhere in that freezing darkness, 700 feet below the surface, something moves through water that hasn't seen light in millennia. Something that has no name in any scientific catalogue. Something that will surface again, eventually, when conditions are right and witnesses are few, and the cycle will continue. The sighting, the report, the dismissal, the secret, until the day comes, if it ever does, when we're finally ready to admit that we share this world with more than we've acknowledged. That mystery isn't something to be feared or mocked, but something to be respected. And that the Loch Ness Monster, whether you believe in it or not, represents a truth we've been avoiding for too long. We don't know everything. We never did. And the sooner we admit that, the sooner we might actually learn what's really out there in the dark water, waiting for us to finally see.